What Daniel just showed us, we're not locals, and we're gonna outlive the locals. For a little while longer, kings and rulers are gonna come and go, but we don't serve them. We serve the King of Kings. And one day every knee and nation will bow, and every tongue and tyrant will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And the King of Kings is coming again. The government will be upon his shoulders. He will rule and reign, not a temporary earthly kingdom, but an eternal one. We're now in week 2 of our series, verse by verse, through this amazing book of God's Word called Home Away from Home. And last week, we began chapter 1, and we met our good guys and our bad guys. We met our good guys, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, teenagers of noble blood from Jerusalem in Judah. And we met our bad guys, the Babylonian Empire led by King Nebuchadnezzar that carried off Daniel and his friends with a bunch of other teenagers of nobility into the land of Babylon. But we also learned that their goal was not to enslave them or to destroy them, but to brainwash them, to turn them into Babylonians, by relegating them to roles in the kingdom, by rewiring them with the culture and language of Babylon, by rewarding them with the best food, wine, accommodations, and comfort, and by renaming them with Babylonian names. And we also talked about how the spirit of Babylon lives on today, and it seeks to do the same thing to us as it did to them. To turn us, whose home is not here but heaven, to turn us into not only people in this world, but to people of this world. To convince us that we are home. But as comfortable as the world tries to make it, and as dark as the world gets, we need to remember we are not home. So what do we do in the face of this spirit of Babylon? How do we have hope at a time like this? Well, that is exactly what we're going to be learning from Daniel and his 3 friends this week as we continue Daniel chapter 1. So we're going to dive right in. Last week we left off at verse 7, and so now we're going to begin at verse 8, and we'll begin to read. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, not with the wine which he drank. Therefore, he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into the favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you would endanger my head before the king. So Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies. And as you see fit, so deal with your servants. So he consented with them in this manner and tested them 10 days. Note takers, if you want to put a little title on your notes today, our title today is Eat Your Vegetables. Eat your vegetables, right? Because we're reading that classic story in the book of Daniel where Daniel and his friends want to lose a few pounds and write a best-selling diet book, right? Not exactly. So what is going on here? What's happening where Daniel and these guys want to make this change? Well, the reason for this, he tells us twice in verse 8. He said that he would not defile himself. So what does that mean? We know that Daniel and these others were given a portion of the king's choicest meats and wine. Why would the king's buffet table defile them? Well, remember, Daniel was a Jew under the old covenant, under the law of Moses. And the law had a lot to say about what sort of food was right to eat and not eat. God gave these laws to his people partly as a way to protect them, but also as a way to separate them from the other cultures of the day. In fact, the word holy means to be separate. God says, be holy, be separate as I am holy, as I am separate. And so these laws were given them for a reason. Well, the thing is, the Babylon buffet didn't have a kosher option. No doubt the choicest meats of the king included pork, shellfish, meat and dairy mixed together. These were things that were not kosher, not allowed in the food laws that Daniel and the others were under. Now that may beg the question, well, couldn't they just eat around it? Like, guys, just take the cheese off the burger, just to skip the crab legs and move on. Well, there's more to it than that. There was another important law that God gave his people regarding the food and drink that they ate. And the law was, do not eat food sacrificed to idols. Do not eat food that was used in the worship of false gods. And this is Babylon. They got a lot of false gods. We talked about just 4 of them last week, just in the renaming of these 4 men. We learned about Bel, Roch, Aku, and Nego. And we also know that Babylon worshiped other gods like Marduk and others. So it was common practice for food, especially the food that was headed to the king's table, to first be used in the worship of and sacrificed to false gods before it went to the dining room. So any way you slice it, according to God's law, this meat and this wine is a no-go for Daniel. So he brings this to the attention of Ashpenaz, the chief of the eunuchs, the guy that Nebuchadnezzar had put in charge of their 3-year training program. And we read that Ashpenaz liked Daniel. There was favor there. There was goodwill there. But Ashpenaz says, hey man, still no can do, Danny boy. My job is to make you guys fat and happy. And if the king sees you looking, sickly and thin, like, have you heard of my boss, Nebuchadnezzar? I wouldn't just get demoted, I get decapitated. So Daniel proposes a test. He says to the steward, the head of the cafeteria there, he says, look, this is day 1. We're not even gonna go before Nebuchadnezzar for 3 years. So how about you give us 10 days? 10 days out of 3 years isn't gonna change anything if we're wrong. For these 10 days, no wine sacrificed to idols, just give us water. No meats that are unclean, just give us vegetables. Now, Daniel isn't looking for a health plan. He's looking for a holiness plan. To remove the unclean food and to only eat things that were allowed under the law that honored God. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't worshiping Marduk with carrots and then bringing them to the table. He knew the vegetables would be okay. So Daniel says, just test this for 10 days and just see if we look worse than the other guys. What do you have to lose? And they said, well, we have a lot to lose, but okay, 10 days, you're on. Verse 15. At the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Thus the steward took away their portion of delicacies and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables. So 10 days of this vegetarian diet, and they not only look as good as the other guys, they look way better than the other guys. Their features look healthier, and notice they are fatter in flesh. They weren't cutting, they were bulking. Now, different beauty standards in Babylon. We're like, could we get back to those? We would be killing it, right? But listen, that just underscores something really important in this chapter. If we were like, you know what, I'm going to try this. I'm going to just do veggies and water only from now on. And you just start doing just vegetables and water. And 10 days from now, someone comes up to you and he's like, wow, you look fatter. You'd be like, this is not working. Right? Because that's not what happens. Switching to vegetables and water isn't how people put on weight. And all of this points to something very important in Daniel chapter 1. It's not about the diet, it's about their deity. Daniel and his friends sought to honor God with their decisions, and God brought blessing even when it didn't make logical sense. More on that later. The difference is so clear, in fact, that the steward decides, I'm not even going to waste time with offering them the other stuff. We'll just stick with vegetables and water from now on for the next 3 years. Now, it isn't 100% clear in the text, but it could be that the steward actually decided to do this with all the men that came from Judah, which would not make Daniel and his friends the most popular guys in the cafeteria when they roll up to the dining hall and instead of the Babylon buffet, we've got a salad bar, right? Not super popular after that. But listen, it wasn't that the Daniel and the boys wanted to be healthy, so they asked for vegetables. No, they knew the healthiest thing that they could do was to honor God. So time passes, schooling continues, and so does the development of these men. Verse 17. As for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skills in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. So there's not only a physical change in these young men, but there's a change in their knowledge and wisdom and giftedness as well. They excelled in this 3-year school that they were in. Remember, they were being taught the language and the literature and the culture of the Chaldeans. And these 4 rise to the top of the class. And Daniel is also given spiritual insight, a gift from the Spirit of God to understand and interpret visions and dreams. And we read this here right away in chapter 1 because this is about to be very important. Beginning in chapter 2, the idea of these dreams and visions and the interpretation of them is going to get real important for the story. And so Daniel writes it in chapter 1 to say, hey, when you read this moving forward, you need to know from the jump that this was a gift from God. That this wasn't me, this was all God. Verse 18. Now at the end of the days, when the king had said that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Then the king interviewed them, and among them all none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they served before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all his realm. So verse 18 references the end of the days. This means we are now jumping ahead 3 years in our story. We're at the end of the 3-year training program, and the men are brought before the king for testing to see what role they would play in the royal court. And King Nebuchadnezzar finds that nobody can touch Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. We just learned in the book of Proverbs recently that wisdom and understanding is from the Lord, and these guys have it in spades, 10 times better than any of the others. So Nebuchadnezzar says, I want these guys as my personal advisors. I want to keep them close. So interestingly enough, Daniel chapter 1 is a story of great pain and oppression. It's a story of exile. It's a story of being under, but it is also a story of these men who followed God and rose up and even thrived in the midst of this oppression and exile. And that is where I believe the Spirit of God would speak to our hearts today through this text. That we would look on and say, okay, if it is true, and it is, that the spirit of Babylon, the spirit of the age, the spirit of the world itself lives on today and still seeks to make us not just people in the world, but to make us people of the world, then how do we navigate this? Looking at the world around us, what do we do now? And how do we walk with any sort of hope or purpose? How can we be a Daniel? We're going to look at the answers to that very important question with the remainder of our time today. So note takers, we're going to jot these down as we go. We're going to talk about some things and look back at the text for answers to these questions. So today we're going to talk about how to be a Daniel. And for your notes, number one, how to be a Daniel, is you need to start with your heart. Start with your heart. Maybe even as a result of this week, with all the rhetoric, with all the talk, with the events, you've wondered, would I really be able to stand up for my faith? Like, would I really be able to do the right thing when push comes to shove? I think all of us have thought that. And I think most of us think, well, I hope I would. I'd like to think I would. I think every follower of God has wondered that. I believe Daniel wondered that growing up. But notice, Daniel decides he's not going to wait until the situation to find out. Verse 8 began, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. Daniel realized that whatever happens next begins here. I need to determine some things going in before I get there. Daniel didn't head to the cafeteria thinking, well, I'll just kind of scope things out first. I'll see what happens. I've heard good things about lobster. Maybe it's not so bad. I'll decide when I get there what I should do. No, Daniel knew the value of pre-deciding. And I think most of us, at least over a certain age, have been on a diet before. And every great diet involves cheat meals, right? And so maybe you've been on that diet and you're doing really well, you're trying to be strict, and then there's a night where all your friends are like, hey, we're going out, we're gonna go get dinner, are you with us? And you're like, yeah, let's do this. And then as you're getting ready, maybe a friend or your spouse comes along and says, hey, so like, are you gonna stay strict tonight, or is this gonna be a cheat meal? And you're like, well, I mean, I've been doing pretty good lately. I'll probably stay strict. I mean, maybe, but I guess we'll just see what happens. Maybe it'll be a cheat meal, but I'll find out when I get there. I'll see what the menu has to say. My friends, you are about to have a cheat meal. And when we enter into that, you're gonna have a lot more than you mean to. But this happens to us in so many more ways than just food. Hey, I heard that movie's got some pretty bad stuff. And hey, that TV show, it's got kind of some raunchy stuff in it. I don't know, I'll just see how it goes. If it gets too bad, I'll turn it off. Hey, that coworker seems a little flirtatious. Maybe you should put some distance there. Well, they haven't like crossed the line yet. I can handle it. I'll just keep an eye on it. Hey, remember the last time we went out and that glass of wine turned into a bottle of wine? Maybe tonight we should just kind of have like a one and done policy. No, I'm not some prude. I'm sure I'll feel it and stop when I need to. Daniel knew that mindset leads us to be swept away. So before he sat down at the table, he determined in his heart that he would not defile himself. Now, we look at the huge moments of the book of Daniel. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah facing the fiery furnace in chapter 3. Daniel facing the lion's den in chapter 6. But listen, there's no Daniel chapter 3 and there's no Daniel chapter 6 without a Daniel chapter 1. Because it started with the heart of these men. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. So here's the question. What do you need to purpose in your heart this week? What do you need to pre-decide going into the week? What are some areas you've been leaving until the moment to decide? It's, you know what, I'm not gonna be nasty on social media, even without what's going on, but you know what, if I feel I need to comment, I'll comment. You're about to say something that you're not gonna be able to take back. What is the thing this week that you're like, I need to pre-decide that I will not defile myself before I get there? Start with your heart. How to be a Daniel, number 2. This is an interesting one. Choose the right battles. Choose the right battles. I want to navigate this carefully, but it's an important one. Because a lot has been going on with Daniel in this chapter. A lot has been happening to these guys. A lot of big, scary, difficult things have happened. Yet there's only one thing that he approaches Ashpenaz about. They gave Daniel a new name. Right? Was that a big deal? Yeah, it sure was. Daniel's name, the name Daniel means God is my judge. And they changed his name to Belteshazzar, which is an honor to the false god Bel. It means Bel's prince. A big deal? Definitely a big deal. But notice Daniel doesn't bring a petition about this. He says, call me whatever you want. I know who I am. Right? Notice we're reading the book of Daniel, not the book of Belteshazzar. Daniel's like, you're Babylonians. I figure you're going to call me a Babylonian name. Call me whatever you want. I know who I am and I know who my God is. They were also forced to take 3 years education in the language and culture of this pagan nation. Daniel and the guys say, okay, fine, I'll learn it. I already know what truth is. I can learn these things, but I know the truth. We don't read something from Daniel on these issues. He's like, look, I don't have to die on every hill. But when it comes to the food that he would have to ingest in direct opposition to the law of God, then Daniel says, hey, I'm under the law, and doing this would defile myself. Therefore, this is a place where I need to stand my ground. There are times, Daniel says, when I need to speak up. There are times when I need to make my voice heard, and what I choose to stand on matters. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying, hey, just let the world steamroll over you. No, not at all. But listen, Daniel, we read, was given wisdom and understanding by God. And he said, look, I'm in a home away from my home. I'm in Babylon. I'm not going to expect Babylonians to not act like Babylonians. There's some things I'm going to face simply because I'm now in this world. But there are other things that are going to be presented to me that would make me of this world. And while I am in this world, my God has told me I am not of this world. Therefore, on those things, I will take a stand. I think there's two types of people on this spectrum. There are those who want to die on every hill. Everything is worth the argument. Pastor said Baal instead of Baal. And if we're not even going to pronounce words correctly, then I just don't know if this is a biblical church. Die on every hill. What do you need to learn from this? Choose the right battles. But listen, there's another side of that spectrum that says, I'm just not going to say anything. Everybody just keep quiet. Just go along. What do you need to hear on this? Choose the right battles. Because there are times we need to take a stand, and what we choose to stand on matters. I saw this in a really powerful way just the night before last. Erica Kirk, Charlie Kirk's widow, gave a speech. And she did it from the podcast studio there where Charlie's podcast was, standing next to his empty chair. It was a 15, 16-minute speech. And I was interested to hear what she would say because I thought, man, this is the widow of a man who was just murdered in front of thousands there. And the world has now seen this murder. She can say whatever she wants and people are going to listen. She can pick whatever fight she wants. She can choose any battle she wants right now because the world is listening. And what did she do? She made it clear, hey, the most important thing that you need to know is that Jesus Christ died for you. And he wants you to be with him for eternity. She shared the gospel of Jesus, and then she said, make sure you find a church, and a church that preaches the Bible. That's what it looks like to choose the right battles. That's where she says, I have an opportunity to stand. This is what I'm standing on. We apply God-given wisdom and discernment, and with his guidance, we choose the right battles. Now, here's the other question. Once we choose those battles, how do we fight them? How to be a Daniel number 3? Rebel with righteous respect. Rebel with righteous respect. Daniel brought this issue to Ashpenaz. He's like, hey man, I gotta stand my ground on this. But notice, he wasn't a jerk. Verse 8 says he requested that they not eat. And later in verse 12, Daniel says, please. He uses the magic word. He's respectful and honoring to those placed over him, even though they are pagan Babylonians, part of a government system that literally ripped him out of his home country. Church, there are places that we need to rise up and stand our ground. But to do that like Daniel means to show care and respect to others when we do so. And if you've learned anything from the last 48 hours, I'm sure that it's today the world has absolutely no shred of respect left. The ability to be respectful, the ability to show honor is over in our society. And so we need to lead the way in this. We need to speak with honor and respect, even when standing our ground. So Daniel showed respect, but notice he was also righteous in his reasons. He told the truth about why he was doing what he did. He didn't try to hide what he was doing or kind of like get through on a technicality. He went to the overseer and the steward and he says the same thing. Hey, the reason I don't want to do this is so we don't defile ourselves. He wasn't ashamed of the reason that he knew he needed to stand his ground. And he was honest about it. He did this with righteous reasoning. So yes, there's going to be times that we need to stand our ground today, but it doesn't mean that we're supposed to kind of skirt the rules and get away with something so we don't hurt our conscience. And it doesn't mean that we're jerks for Jesus in the world, because the world doesn't need more of that. To be a Daniel, when the time comes, and it will come, and for many of us it has come, we need to rebel with righteous respect. Now, this next part, don't raise your hands, but I want to talk to the really logical people in the room for a minute. Just those who are like, look, I know that if I do A, it equals B, and that's just how the world works. Give me the formula. There's logical steps that bring logical outcomes. I see some people kind of nudging people next to them right now. And if you're not nudging someone, that means you're this person, okay? Listen, here's what I want to say to these people. Point number 4 is going to be one that messes with you a little bit. It's going to be hard to get your head around, but listen, it may be the exact thing that God is aiming at your heart and mind today. So here it is, number 4, how to be a Daniel. Don't forget God's economy. Don't forget God's economy. Think about this for a moment. As Daniel goes through like points number 1, 2, and 3, he starts with his heart. He chooses the right battle. He rebels with righteous respect. He does these things. There is still no logical reason that Ashpenaz would allow them to do this. Ashpenaz gains nothing from this test. In fact, he puts himself at risk. He's like, look, even 10 days, I don't want to get in trouble. I'm putting my neck on the line for you. And he certainly doesn't believe in the God they're trying to honor. There is nothing that Daniel and his friends can logically do to make this happen. But that is when we see God's way of doing things, God's economy. Take a look at verse 9 on the screen here. Now, God had brought Daniel into the favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. Who did it? Not Daniel. God had made this happen. We see this again in the results from 10 days of vegetables and water. The results, they get fatter. And the logical person's wrestling with this. See, that's the part that doesn't make sense to me. I just don't. This has literally led some people to be like, well, maybe that word means something different. Maybe it just means like they looked better. No, it means fatter. Because listen, it's not about the logic. It's about God's economy. It's not about A plus B equals C. It's about when I honor God, I watch him work. Let me give you a real recent example of how God likes to do things like this. Someone from our own church body here at the house. There's a family that's involved in serving you and serving us week in and week out. They're here every time the church doors are open. And a few weeks ago, the husband abruptly lost his job. And they weren't sure exactly how to proceed, but they knew what to keep doing. To keep bringing it to the Lord, and to keep walking in obedience and faithfulness to him, even when it didn't make sense. And instead of pulling back from serving the church because they were rocked by it, they actually leaned in and they said, whatever happens next, it's going to find us worshiping and it's going to find us serving. Well, a couple of weeks ago, the husband was here at the church. The doors weren't even open at the church. He was just here volunteering, doing some work around the building, helping us get ready to host you on the weekend. And while he was here, his wife called him. She said, hey, have you seen the bank account? And he said, no. She said, check it and call me back. Isn't that a fun call to get? And he's like, now what? So he logs in, looks at the bank account, and he did not see what he expected to see. But what he saw was a rather large deposit in the bank account that actually covered most of the debt that they had been accruing. He's like, that's interesting. Come to find out that what had happened was there had been a settlement and some benefits from a situation like a long time ago that they'd basically almost given up on waiting for that had finally been cleared up. So this was the initial deposit that paid these debts. And then he found out he was going to also receive a monthly deposit that amounted to, wait for it, just more than the monthly paycheck he had just lost. When his wife told me about this, she said, can you believe it? My husband lost his job and we had to up our tithe. Yeah, I can believe it. Because that's God's economy. I've seen it a million times. It doesn't surprise me anymore, but it still delights me. Because it's not about the logical things working out, it's what God does. Now, look, just because of the example I gave and the word economy, don't let that make you think this is about just financial terms. It wasn't financial in our text, after all. You've got God-given favor to Daniel that he couldn't control. You've got physical blessing of weight gain when logic and biology says they should have dropped weight. But listen, when we walk with God, that's God's economy. We don't need to be formulaic. We just need to be faithful and watch him do what only he can do. Amen? Number 5, how to be a Daniel? Eat your vegetables. Eat your vegetables. Listen, this is an interesting one. Daniel stood his ground. God brought him favor. But Daniel still had to do the hard thing. Notice, even with God's favor, God's supernatural favor, Daniel didn't demand some special kosher meat selection that made it easier on him and harder on everybody else. No, he said, I'll take the hit. Daniel was a man of Judah's nobility. He was used to eating good food, but he said, look, I'll just eat vegetables and drink water for 10 days, which remember then turned into 3 years. Daniel was willing to do the hard thing when he stood his ground. Daniel said, I'm willing to let this cost me something. So the question is, am I willing to do the hard thing when I stand my ground? Some of us are like, yeah, I'll stand my ground as long as they then make it easier for me. But what if it needs to cost you something? Daniel didn't do the easy thing. Just heads up, I do not want to do vegetables and water for 3 years. I don't want to do it for 10 days. But Daniel says, if that's what it takes, then I'll do it. What would be an example of this in our modern day and age? It could be a lot of things, but say you work for a business and it comes to time to file some tax documents, some paperwork. And the boss comes to you and says, look, this stuff is the worst. It's going to take hours, but nobody really reads this. And the guy who's supposed to sign it, he's not coming in till later. Look, just skip to page 9, fill this out, write this guy's name, and you're done. And you hear that and you're like, that doesn't sit right with me. Like that, it's illegal, it's not right. I can't do that, that's dishonest. So what do? Do we storm in and say, no, I shall not be party to such a thing. I will go on Facebook and blast this company until they change their policies. Or do you eat your vegetables? Do you say, okay, well, if I'm supposed to sign my name to this and I need to put something I can sign my name to, I'm going to stay late tonight. And I'm going to do the work. I'm going to write the notes. I'm going to fill out the forms and make sure it's filed correctly. That's eating your vegetables. It's not the easy way, but it's the Daniel way. Now you may be thinking, I'm liking this less and less as we go along here. Don't forget, though, how to be a Daniel, number 6. Don't forget, testing brings triumph. Testing brings triumph. You've probably heard before that numbers in the Bible often carry a symbolism with them. 6 is a number that's often referred to humanity or even rebellion. 7 is the number of perfection or completeness, right? So my wife and I have 7 children, and when I watch her walk around these halls carrying one of your newborns in her arms, and she gets that look to me, I say, oh, honey, remember 7 is the biblical number of completion. To which she says, yes, but 8 is the biblical number of new beginnings. Well, in the Bible, the number 10 is often associated with the number of testing. And we see this in, the 10 plagues sent to test Egypt, that they would let the people go. And in our passage here, Daniel says, test us for 10 days. He says, I'm willing to eat the vegetables. I'm willing to do the work. I'm willing to honor God. Test us. And God says in the book of 1 Samuel, those who honor me, I will honor. And so that testing brings triumph. And there's really something beautiful here about these numbers, because it isn't the only time the number 10 is used in the chapter. Look at verse 20 on the screen here. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all his realm. Maybe it feels like your quest to follow God, your desire to live a godly life, to honor him, to not be defiled by the things of the world, to share Jesus, especially now. It feels like the world is just testing me on this. I feel like I'm going through it constantly. Then rejoice, because testing brings triumph. I do not think it is a coincidence that we see this number applied twice. God says, Daniel says, let me be tested in this. And God says, oh, okay, you're going to do 10 days? Then you'll be 10 times better. Because your testing brings triumph. Now, as we get to the end of this teaching, maybe you're still feeling a little heavy right now, because we just talked about some really good and practical stuff, some helpful stuff, some challenging stuff, but all of what we've talked about involves the idea of being under. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they were powerless in all this. I mean, they had to obey God in the midst of this, but it was all about being under the oppressive Babylonian government, under the spirit of Babylon. So even the points that we're hopefully being encouraged by are encouraging us on how to live under this. And that can be heavy, especially today. Well, I've got good news for you, because we have one last verse to read in the chapter, and then one last point to go with it. Let's finish the chapter first. If you still have your Bibles open, it's verse 21. Thus Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. You're like, what does that mean? Why are we introducing a new character in the last sentence of a chapter? And isn't Nebuchadnezzar the king? Well, who's this guy? Here's what's interesting. It all gives us a point. Jot down point number 7. How to be a Daniel. Get ready to outlive the locals. Verse 21 introduces a character, Cyrus. And what's really interesting about this is in chapter 1, more than likely, Cyrus hasn't even been born yet. But he was just mentioned in chapter 1. Why? Because Daniel just gave us the scope of the book. At this point, Daniel is under the authority of Babylon. He's powerless. He's under Nebuchadnezzar. Babylon holds all the authority, all the power. But with this one verse, Daniel just gave us a spoiler. Because if you know your history, this is what Daniel just let us know. Daniel is going to outlive the rise and the fall of Nebuchadnezzar. Then Daniel's going to outlive the rise and the fall of Nebuchadnezzar's son. Then Daniel's going to outlive the rise and fall of Nebuchadnezzar's grandson and watch the fall of Babylon. Then Daniel's going to outlive the rise and fall of Darius the Mede, and then Daniel's going to be there for the rise of King Cyrus. For those counting at home, that's 5 kings and the fall of Babylon. I know we feel it. We feel the captivity. We feel the brokenness of the world. We look at the hatred and we say, I can't live here any longer. Someone told me last night, I checked it this morning. There are people that are now printing t-shirts and stickers that say, I outlived Charlie Kirk. And what breaks my heart about that is not merely the hatred, the mocking, but that they're wrong. They're identifying themselves as locals, people of this world. And what Daniel just showed us, we're not locals, and we're gonna outlive the locals. For a little while longer, kings and rulers are gonna come and go, but we don't serve them, we serve the King of Kings. And one day every knee and nation will bow, and every tongue and tyrant will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And the King of Kings is coming again. The government will be upon his shoulders. He will rule and reign, not a temporary earthly kingdom, but an eternal one. You say, when is that going to happen? How is that going to happen? What do we look for? Keep reading the book of Daniel, because he's going to tell us as we continue. But here's what I want us to leave with today. That point from Daniel reminds us the truth in all of this. We are in a place of brokenness. We are in a place of oppression. We are in a place that is not our home. And yet Daniel says, I know it's not our home, but just wait. because we outlive this home. Babylon's falling away, and Daniel's still there. This world will pass away. But those who belong to Jesus, we continue on with him. He's coming to bring restoration. He's coming to bring a new heaven and a new earth. And this is why, even in the midst right now, we can rejoice. We can rejoice because either we're going to head to the grave one day, or he's coming back for us before we can. And either way, that's when we're actually going home. That's when we live. We outlive it all because of Christ and him alone. And that's actually a reason to celebrate. But those of us who celebrate are only the ones who have trusted in Christ.
Hey everybody, Pastor Brian here. Thanks so much for checking out this teaching from the house. Look, if something stood out to you, ministered to you, or maybe you could use some prayer or have some more questions about Jesus, drop us a line. info@thehousechat.com. That's chat with 2 T's. Now, if you want to support the ministry God is doing here at the house, or just get a whole bunch more information on who we are as a church, you can head to thehousechat.com. Have a great week.